Okay. Hi, everyone. So today we'll be having a roundtable discussion on marriage and family laws in India. And Sanchali and I will be moderating this discussion. And I'm Ryosha, a political science major in Ashoka. It'll be great if everyone can introduce themselves.
I'm Sanchali, and I'll be co-moderating this roundtable with Ryosha. And I'm a LLB student from Jindal, and I'm in my final year.
Hi, my name is Mukundan. I'm so sorry to interrupt whoever I interrupted. I study a number of things at Ashoka. It's debatable whether I studied well.
Garima?
Hi, I'm Garima. I'm in my 4th year of law school in Jindal Global University.
Ishita, Sushmita, and Sabahat and Amandeep.
Hi, I'm Ishita, and I am a first year law student in Jindal.
Shall I go next?
Yep.
Is it hanging?
Yeah, you can.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. Sushmita this side. I'm a master's student of public policy at Jindal University. And all the best.
Hi everyone, I'm Sabahat and I'm a fellow at Ashoka University.
I think there are some sound issues at your end, but okay, that's cool. Or you can just join in later when Amandeep, when your connection is better. Okay, so to start off, I'll give a brief insight into the institution of marriage and what makes it an important topic of discussion. So interestingly, it is a universal feature across almost all societies. It's present in different forms and it's followed in different, using different social norms and customs. But everywhere, almost every individual is expected to get married at a point of their life. Marriage, a formal recognition of two people in a personal relationship, is an essential institution of economic and political organization of society. And its validity is taken for granted to the point that marriage is actively promoted by the state through legal and economic benefits also. Yet a simple historical context shows, as Margaret Hunt and Stephanie Coates emphasize, that it evolved as a means of transferring all kinds of resources, economic, social, political resources between families. And this exchange of resources was facilitated by the exchange of women, right? And marriage retains this function even today to an extent. So thus, it's a key site of reproduction of gender hierarchies, inequalities, and social relations. And this does not always require a meticulous dissection of social norms, laws, or their implications in society, but it's evident in all laws, policies, and schemes relating to family planning, marriage, or even women empowerment. So, like, consider a statement made by the former Chief Justice of India, Deepak Mishra, in 2019, claiming that criminalizing marital rape will create absolute anarchy in families, and our country is sustaining itself because of the family platform which upholds family values. This marital rape itself is not recognized as a crime in India, lest it upend the base structure of society, the sacrosanct institution of marriage.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah. Anyone wants to add points to that? Okay, sure, Mukundan, go ahead. I think
so on the question of marital rape itself, I think what will precede what I speak to be quite a bit of sociological analysis about the patriarchy and the culture around what happens within the marriage in the country. And those points are very well taken and justified. We need to be asking those deeper social questions. But I think it's useful to also begin the conversation by looking at the excuses the government and the judiciary has given for sustaining this law. And the excuse goes something like this. You just said mentioned what the Chief Justice said, which is that criminalizing violent sexual activity, not non-consensual sexual activity within a marriage would disrupt the Indian family unit to a certain extent. And also that this concept of marital rape is international and it doesn't apply to India peculiarly, where there are issues like poverty, illiteracy. And I think we should actually call the government and the judiciary's bluff on this practicalities excuse and ask of them the serious question as to how exactly does the criminalization of this activity threaten the family unit? How exactly do we define the family unit in India, and how much rights are we affording to this abstract entity called the family unit? Is it, for example, like religious communities have specific rights in India, minorities have specific rights? Are we defining this family unit in that sense? Is it subsumed under those wider sociological categories? And even if it does happen that this abstract idea of a family unit has some certain rights, are those rights really comparable when the fundamental rights of women are involved? Does the court even have the ability to make that trade-off, or are some things just particularly sacrosanct? So I would welcome much more sociological analysis, but I think we should also be asking the more legal and more nuanced questions that the government is desperately trying to avoid.
Karima, would you like to respond?
Yes. So the Indian law, it actually holds an anachronistic view on conjugal relationships, where it is believed that a wife must submit to her husband's whims and fancies. And marital rape is also considered as some sort of intense love making between the husband and wife. And so the government feels that there is no need to be interfering on that aspect. And there's also this belief that women should be obligated to, as it is her duty as a good wife, to just be there for her husband. And the government actually feels that by criminalizing marital rape, it would be actually destabilizing the institution of marriage, and would open doors for many false allegations of where husbands could be harassed for personal or economic gain. While this, according to me, while this must be an issue and this could be addressed, but this doesn't feel like a sure way of not criminalizing something. Even after the 2012 Nirbhaya gang rape case, the UPA government at that time, which was the ruling party, had brought an ordinance where it proposed that marital rape should be criminalized, but the government's interpretation of marriage and crime somehow didn't let it to be criminalized. And also it is seen by the United Nations that 2/3 of marital women aged between 15 years to 50 years are tortured, beaten, and are forced to sex and that too for dowry. And there have also been instances where the police have actually refused to note down the complaints of these victims, as they fail to see anything wrong in the whole act because of the orthodox mentality. However, when we see such things, there are a couple of things, and it is a violation of a women's right under Articles 14, 15, and 21, which is not ensuring her equal protection of law, and moreover, it is discriminating between a married and an unmarried woman. So when we go by Section 375, it was actually enacted to protect the women from rape. However, at the same time, it also imposes an exception that a woman under 18 years or older, if she is married, she can't allege her husband to have raped her. So can we say that it's actually a discrimination between a married and an unmarried woman here? Also, it contradicts the ideals of Article 21 as well by denying the wives who have been victims of marital rape the right to healthy and a dignified life. They are forced into sexual activity, which traumatizes the wife, leading to physical and mental trauma. So yeah, that's my take on this.
I think you bring up a great point, and in general to any law, stands to be misused, right? So it doesn't really make sense at all to not criminalize marital rape just because it stands to be misused by people. I think Ishita is next.
Yeah, I have a few points to add. Like Garima said that, not only is there a discrimination when it comes to like marital rape in married non-married women, if you think about any act, any law protecting sexual harassment and rape against men and other genders and the third gender, transgenders and non-binaries and gender fluid people, there are no provisions available for them, and legally they cannot even be raped. Also, the whole definition of rape, which is defined in the Constitution, that is so heteronormative. Also, talking about marital rape, getting back to the topic of marital rape, there's this case of Fulmoni Das, and she was an 11-year-old girl, and her 35-something-year-old husband raped her, and she died because of it. Not only is that child marriage, but that's marital rape, and that still was not like this Fulmoni Devi case. This was the husband was not charged because at that time it was not mentioned that a person married, that a woman married, woman under 15 years of age married, if her husband has sex with her without her consent, that was not included to be a rape at that time. Also, in 2015, there was a petition that was held in the Supreme Court of India to criminalize marital rape. And in the case of Anish Kumar versus State of Bihar, it was observed that the collapse of the social and family systems will collapse if marital rape is criminalized under the already existing biased laws. And again, it was another excuse to justify why marital rape is not criminalized in India, which is one of the 36 countries in the world that do not criminalize marital rape. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishita. Does anyone have any other points to add regarding marital rape? If not,
Can I go next?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I completely agree with like what Garima said. Like even like though India is a signatory to like many treaties of the UN, but still like they're not abiding by it, and it's a completely like a violation of Article 21. Just because you're married or you're not married, you still can't treat a woman's body as an object, and just because if the husband wants. And also like if we see like in the COVID time, so as soon as the pandemic started, so everyone was in a lockdown. And there were so many cases of like marital rape because domestic violence had become like a huge it had become like a huge topic like during the whole pandemic time, because there were so many cases and women were helpless. They could not go anywhere out, and they could not even go and complain. Like there were so many cases, I feel, during this time of post pregnancy, and violation of the body was like the most, I think, in this time. So that's what I just wanted to add a few pointers with what Garima said.
I think Ishita also brought up a really important point about child marriages, and that brings us to the point of Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006, and how it views underage marriages and how it has actually affected women and underage women. Sabahat, go ahead.
Yes, there were some excellent points that were put forward regarding the criminalization of marital rape and why it should be criminalized. And coming to the point of child marriage, under the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act of 2006, child marriage is considered valid but voidable. So there is this element of validity versus voidability. And after the failure of Child Marriage Restraint Act in 1929, we see that Prohibition of Child Marriage Act was introduced. But the increase in the social practices exposed the lack of awareness, lack of enforcement agencies, and actually the lack of administration to actually make the law effective on ground. And regarding this, Malvika Rajkumar, apart from the social practices, Malvika Rajkumar presents inherent flaws that are present in Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. Where firstly, she says that there is a contention with personal laws. We have seen several cases in which, for example, Muslim personal law coming in contention with the PCMA, where a Muslim girl is considered ready for marriage at the age of 14 or at the age of 15. So in those cases, does PCMA supersede personal law, or do personal laws supersede PCMA? And we have seen cases in Haryana, we have seen cases in Gujarat where the judiciary has not come up with the exact statement that which law supersedes in these cases. So we are seeing a contention between the personal law and the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, and then again the social community, so the prevalence of social practices, and then this whole concept of voidability of PCMA. And of course, if you're talking about other laws, we can also talk about the accountability of officers that are involved under this act. For example, CPMOs that are involved. There is no provision for the accountability of CMPOs that are present under this law, like it is in the POSCO Act. So there are so many bureaucratic hurdles, and if you're reporting your cases, what happens to the cases after they have been reported by the CMPO? There is no actually that mechanism that will make this law effective on ground. And apart from that, the third point that I wanted to bring in was that you can declare the child marriage void, and who can declare this void is the child itself or the best friend or the guardian. And here we are completely negating the societal institution or the institution of family, where a child doesn't have that kind of power or that kind of an agency to go ahead and declare this marriage void. Or we are completely negating the concept of social conditioning among best friends or guardians or even among CMPOs. So there are so many fallacies, contentions, and flaws within the PCMA itself that it has really lacked in terms of effectiveness and reducing the cases of child marriage. So these are my points regarding this. If someone can add to it, it would be really nice.
Mukundan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose flawed as it is, the unfortunate reality is that the PCMA, together with the Supreme Court judgment in 2017, I think, that completely eliminated any possibility of consensual activity with minor children. These two together do constitute the frontier of the government's fight against child marriage. So if you had to ask the question of how would you improve on the PCMA, I suppose such a policy move would have to be informed by on-the-ground realities, right? This law presumes to A, prevent child marriages from occurring, and B, protect those who are already involved in some kind of child marriage. So the factors that should be ideally informing any alterations to this law is, first, the dynamics of child marriage trends itself in India. Nobody can deny that child marriage rates have been steadily falling in the country across these decades. But the fact is that it has still persisted. But then again, it hasn't persisted in the same way across all of these years. We find a UNICEF analysis, for example, found that almost half of the child marriages that take place in India occur in 5 specific states. That's Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Bengal. So any new law would have to look at whether there are socioeconomic factors that are peculiar to these states that are driving this persistent sort of remnants in terms of child marriage statistics. Another thing that you need to look at is whether newer factors, right? Income inequality, the fact that urbanization dictates that a lot of people in rural areas have got to migrate to urban areas very early in their life. And then there's climate change that is fundamentally changing the nature of work in our rural areas, are these new factors somehow also affecting the quality of child marriages that you find in India? The point I'm driving at is that when you are trying to prevent a social phenomena like that, you have to be informed by on the ground realities. Very quickly, I'll also make a couple of points about the protection clause that this law currently has. Now, this idea of protection currently only extends to making sure that if a marriage is declared void, if two children are married, for example, and the marriage is declared void, then the woman in this marriage would have to be given some sort of material support by her in-laws, and any children that she has already born will be a legitimate child in the eyes of the law. This is the extent of the protection that the law currently provides. Why do we not ask bigger questions, right? Are there mechanisms that are able to reintegrate people in child marriages back into societies? What are there mechanisms that then helps these young mothers take care of their children? Are there mechanisms that are cognizant of the sexual assault issues that these women particularly face, and are there sensitive ways of dealing with these things? I know that all of these are easier said than done, but we've acknowledged that the PCMA is the best chance we have. We've acknowledged that it has inadequacies. So if we're discussing fixing these things, a new law should take all of these things into account.
I think you brought up some great points. Amandeep, you can go ahead next.
Hi, thank you. So I think that Mukundan, those were some brilliant points, and we definitely need to rethink the legislation and expand its ambit, surely in the positive direction. And I also acknowledge the Sabahat's points about the agency that is available to the couple, especially to the women in these such marriages. And so I would like to draw attention to a particular special point, which is that according to an article in the Hindu, which also talks about marriage age being raised to 21, it also says it is a moderated discussion between Madhu Mehra and Jayana Kothari. And they point out that, almost only some of the cases are genuine cases that need to be addressed, and an overwhelming proportion of cases under the PCMA are sort of a malicious prosecution by the parents, maybe against the couple or maybe against women who elope with their husbands. So, and that is something that needs to be looked at as well. And so I think the agency clause makes some sense in that sense, and should be preserved in going forward in future iterations of this act. Another issue that I want to draw attention to is the fact that maybe legislation alone cannot be the only solution in this case. Maybe we need to look beyond the PCMA, maybe we need to look beyond the rule book. And how we can do that is maybe investment in social infrastructure, which is something the government has been very reluctant to do. And consecutive governments have failed to take the baton in their hands. And so in this sense, I think education and healthcare come forward, and they can actually, once you make sure that your society progresses, you can ensure that it's not just a question of legal norms, it's also a question of social compliance. And until we change the social culture, a legislation can only go so far. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Sabahat raised like a really good point, like about the fundamental rights and the personal laws, what I feel. So like in Article 13 also, when we discuss like the personal laws cannot be framed in a way that it would even violate the fundamental laws. So like another discussion which would also come was about the Triple Talaq, and like even about the child marriages also, like what Sabahat said about the POSCO Act and everything. So another like a discussion like which we could talk about is having an equal age for both the genders for marrying. Like why do we have like 18 for girls and like 21 for men? Like what is the basic reason for it? Like it's just because of the gender. You don't need two different ages because it's two different genders. Like it's really stereotypical, and how the Indian society is very, very patriotic just because they think that the girls will be mature for their age and like it's 18, so it's okay for them to get married, and for men it's 21. Like India, like again, though I'm saying it again, like being a signatory to like the treaties, are abiding in no such laws, like, and they should like make something like, and it's completely a violation of 21 and 14 as well. Like where is the equality if there is like no equality in marriage of age itself? So does anybody have any points to say for this?
Amandeep, please go ahead.
Sure, I could go ahead, but if someone else wishes to go before me, that would be really welcome as well. So, anybody, but okay. So I would like to also draw attention, since the Hindu article that I was talking about also draws attention to this fact, and it raises a sort of a countervailing point that the convention that India has signed seed of, which is the Convention against eliminating all forms of discriminatory practices against women. So according to that, and even according to a lot of international customary laws, the age of the legal age of marriage and the age of marriage actually coincide at 18. So does that mean that instead of raising the age of women to 21, we bring down the age of marriage for boys to 18 instead? And maybe that is the sort of equality we need to look at, because while it might make perfect sense in theoretical terms that raising the age of marriage for women to 21 might help us in achieving better socio-educational objectives, but the reality on the ground may be different. And this happens in a lot of cases. The research, and that is why evidence-based research is the need of the hour. And many of times, what appears on the I guess on the foreground is not actually what happens in the real terms. So even the Law Commission of India, even when it recommended that actually the age of marriage can be equalized and must be equalized for both men and women, and it should actually maybe 18, it should be 18 instead of 21. And so while we understand that it's often seen that marriage and education happen in opposition to each other, it does not have to be that way. Again, this boils down to the socio-cultural norms that our society also faces, in addition to the legal system. Yeah. So that's how I'd like to start the discussion on this.
So I think for all the questions that we've been asking, I think one really important question, one really important thing we need to discuss is how a woman's identity is constantly conflated as the family's identity, how a woman's identity is construed as the family's identity, whatever, even a woman's personal laws or personal rights, fundamental rights are infringed upon just to protect the family unit, because in the eyes of the state, a woman represents the family, right? So Amandeep brought up a brilliant point of education and marriage being at ends, and that reminds me of two schemes in Bengal of Kanya Shri and Rupa Shri. So they're quite interesting because at one end, Kanya Shri promotes the education of so at one end, Kanya Shri, the scheme Kanya Shri promotes the education of the girl child by paying the girl child to complete her education until she is 18, till she reaches the age of 18. And on the other end, Rupa Shri promises poor families around like 25,000 rupees, an economic support of 25,000 rupees at the time of a marriage, as long as she marries after the age of 18. So this seems quite contradictory. At one end, you're supporting her education, but then you're not supporting it after her high school finishes. You're not supporting her higher education. And in fact, you're supporting the idea that she's a burden in the family. And this is only given to girl child, right? This, this assistance of 25,000 rupees is almost a form of dowry to ensure that we will help you with your dowry as long as she reaches the age of 18, right? So this idea of woman construing family is also, propagated in all other kinds of welfare schemes for women, ironically, even for female empowerment, right? Female empowerment is often just confused to be the empowerment of the family, right? Female empowerment schemes will very often focus on the development of the child, making sure that the child receives food, making sure that the child goes to school. So I think this is one important aspect that we need to question, that at the center of all these policies, laws, age limits is the idea that the woman represents the family. And yes, that needs to be changed to change the outlook of all policies and laws we have regarding marriage and family. Okay, Amandeep, sure, go ahead.
Then go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Oh, how kind. No, I just wanted to say, I actually wanted to engage with you on the Kudumbashri question, right? Because my understanding is that families, when women are of a marriageable situation, are given a certain amount of money, and I certainly get the optics of it. It's almost as if you're incentivizing people to treat women as property, essentially, as burdens. But it also happens to be the case that it's a very real economic reality in India that people get into huge amounts of debts for their daughters' marriages, right? And people do see marriages as a natural conclusion of one's youth. Now, I know that needs to change, but on the other hand, I also know that regardless of what the government does, that social change isn't going to be instantaneous. And when that social change isn't instantaneous, if the government does not do anything to alleviate the debt situation at the very least, then that's sort of going to squeeze people out and make them even less. Poorer people are going to be automatically less resistant to wholesale social change because you tend to become more, or there's a wide body of evidence that supports you becoming more orthodox. No, I think my point here is to say that although we've been critical of the government, it's this really does sort of remain a very tricky situation for anyone to navigate, and we should be sympathetic to those things.
Definitely. Just to add a small point, the very fair consideration, but at the same time, I feel like it requires a deeper analysis of the situation, because again, the age limits for this scheme is that the woman needs to be 18 years of age and the man needs to be 21 years of age, right? So I think a deeper analysis of the situation might reap at least better age limits for the same, or it's not just like why does the economic why do the 25,000 rupees need to go to the woman? Because this becomes, in a sense, dowry, right? It can also go to directly to the man's family. So this seems like a very shallowly thought scheme. Sure, Amandeep and then Sushmita. I'm so sorry.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ryosha, and thank you, Mukundan, for raising those important points. And while I think something that clears the picture a bit is that this scheme also adds the dimension of low income groups, and your maximum income for the family needs to be 1.5 LPA, which is not a lot of money, to be honest. And if we look at the standards, and so you realize that this scheme is targeting a social group, a socio-economic group that faces those routine hardships that Mukundan mentioned, and they get aggravated, absolutely aggravated in times of marriage. So, and I also think a very important point to note here is that as we discussed previously in a different context, that the misuse of a law or a scheme by some people should not deter its use for good for the masses. And maybe this good is subjective in the sense that why do we have reservation? Let's look at that. That addresses a social problem, a social evil. Well, in an ideal situation, we may never have that social evil, but that social evil exists and reservation exists to counter that. In a similar manner, in an ideal Indian society, there would be no problem of dowry. But since the problem of dowry exists, and since a lot of low income category families are drastically impacted by that, and even middle income groups for that matter, who are not covered by this scheme, and let's face the problem of society. As one climbs the social ladder, one climbs the economic ladder, the cost of dowry also goes up astronomically for for some sections of society, which is not desirable at all, and which is not being questioned. But the fact which is being addressed by this scheme is that the society is at flaw. And while the society takes time to fix itself, those low income families should not be at a disadvantage. And I think in that sense, this scheme makes some sense. While we may not achieve anything by abolishing it altogether, we may certainly look towards amending it and reforming it and delivering it in a more inclusive manner, as maybe Ryosha suggested.
That's a very fair and valid point, but the point I was exactly making was, what's the outlook of these welfare programs, right? When you talk about the scheme Rupashri, one could raise the question, why isn't patient to a girl's higher education? Why does high school? Why is a girl paid marry but not continue education? So the reason I believe is because marriage is considered a very essential of a woman's life. This is an end goal in her life, that she will one or another. And these schemes just buy into these mindsets. They propagate this outlook, right? Because these 25,000 rupees could well go towards the girls' higher education, but they do not. The focus is on what is the main purpose of these schemes. But yes, Sushmita, do you want to go next?
Hi, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank God. Okay, sorry, I think there have been a lot of disruptions from my end. The internet is acting volatile today. So just a few pointers when we talk about, child marriages or social evils like marital rape, or we talk about domestic violence, right? So we talk about legal nuances here. But, at the grassroots level, I suppose, because I've seen that in my very much village here, that the people, the residents of the villages do not know the legal nuances. They do not know what Article 14 or Article 21 is. So how do we improve that amongst them? So one is to improve the institutional mechanisms, that is the health centers or the primary health centers in which the Anganwadis and the ANMs work, right? The ASHA workers work there. So if you try to delegate them with delegate them authority, or teach them or to disseminate information on what rape is, and what child marriage is, and the what are the outcomes of a marital rape or the domestic violence. So I think that way, I think then we can bridge a gap as citizens, right? Yeah, I think, yeah, that's it from my end for now. I mean, that's what I was able to come up with.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Ishita.
Yeah, I think also, sorry.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead.
So I think it also has to do at the block level, that is tehsil level. They have the BDOs and the health department or the women development corporations. They need to be sensitized. So when we talk about the topmost bureaucracy, or we talk about the legal aspects, that is only for the elite, or for people like us, who don't face much of these issues. But the people in the villages, the ones who come from the reserved category or from the lower strata, they go through these difficulties or these aspects on a regular basis. So sensitizing these institutional mechanisms is a go ahead for, is that what I would like to add. And also recently I had this very interesting incidents with women development corporation in Patna, and because I come from Patna, and I had to report a domestic violence case of one of these residents close by. And when I tried to give them a call, their numbers weren't they weren't available on the 4 consecutive days. So here the implementation aspect, and when I had sent an email to them, they did not respond to the emails. And that's a wing of the social welfare department. And the managing director of that department is an IS officer. So if an IS officer is also not receiving or responding or readdressing my grievances, so then think how grassroots level works. So sensitizing these people is very necessary. And also, the contact numbers, they don't work. They say ki ye number amanya nahi hai. That's it. I think so here, I think in different aspects, I think implementation, I think we as citizens, I think we need to connect dots and, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Ishita, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I kind of want to add on to what Sushmita said. Like, I mean, I talked about marital rape earlier, and just to like kind of continue with that, the institution of marriage and how it's perceived and how the roles of a woman as a wife and a man as a husband, how these are kind of like perceived by the society, that plays a huge role in why marital rapes occur. Garima mentioned this earlier, that a man is supposed to be a dominant person in the family, while a woman is a submissive one who is, her entire significance of her existence is to reproduce children. That's how women, that's how wives are perceived in our society. And I think, like Sushmita said, sensitizing people about why child marriage is wrong, and why marital rape is wrong, and why marriage does not equal to consent. That particular thing is very important, because making people aware of the laws that bind them, of the constitution, about the basic fundamental laws, that is important. But at the ground level, a person who has never really been educated, who never has had basic education, and from the moment they were born, they were told a society works a specific way, and if you are a woman, you are the submissive gender, the weaker gender, and if you're a man, you're the dominant gender. And rape essentially, not even marital rape, but rape essentially is not that bad of a thing. I think telling them why rape is wrong, and rape is, other than being like non-consensual, it's physical abuse, it's mental abuse, it's emotional abuse. People get PTSD, like rape survivors get PTSD and everything. And yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Sushmita was saying.
When I go, I just want to round out this discussion we've been having, in the sense that even in our discussions so far, we tend to look at all of the issues that we did. Marital rape, we looked at child marriage, we looked at sexual assault. And we tend to think of these either as developmental issues because of poverty and those kinds of things, or as social issues. We say it's the patriarchy, or at some points we think of it as a women's issue, so to speak, that it's about the safety of women. But I think it's actually useful at the broad policy level to start looking at this as a national security issue. Because what we have described in vivid detail over the past hour is that large sections of the population are almost perennially under the threat of actual violence and psychological trauma. This is not imagined occasional violence. It's legally sanctioned violence that occurs repeatedly over and over again, and under the silence of no one else watching and the law not protecting you. I just asked the question, if there was a single incident at the border, the government would be ready to roll out so many laws, but if such a large segment of the population is vulnerable to these threats, why not afford these issues the same sort of urgency you would an actual, a supposedly actual national security issue?
I think that's a great approach. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I'm just a bit curious, and I'd just like to push you on that. Translate into the schemes and policies that are being implemented. Like, how does this approach really change the schemes and policies, or was meant to help women? And if you want to add any questions.
No, it was just a follow-up to Mukundan's points, but I would love to hear more from Mukundan himself first, about his views on this issue of this idea of national security, is bringing that into the table, and it's super duper relevant. I absolutely love the point. So yeah, Mukundan, go ahead.
Okay, you have all caught me on my bluff in That was more of a rhetorical finish, but I could think of how you would apply it to policy. In the sense of there are certain departments, as we've discussed, that tend to work with these issues, right? There's the Ministry of Child Welfare, for example. There's the Ministry of Women, the Ministry of Rural Development, so and so on and so forth. But if you could mobilize a larger proportion of the government's resources, the Ministry of Home, for example, has sophisticated ways in terms of how it communicates with police officers, and it has a whole series of workshops and so on and so forth, and it sort of effectively sensitizes its personnel towards specific kinds of threats. Now, if a Ministry of Home Affairs could coordinate with a Ministry of Women and Child Development, can we not use that to accelerate the sensitization processes that we've talked about? Instead of outsourcing it to local Anganwadi workers and third-party activists, if we can coordinate a much wider cross-departmental approach right from the center level and do it much more earlier, I suppose that would be one way. But I have to confess, it's a 60-year-old issue. It sounded nice to say, let's treat it like a border issue and move really quickly, but I don't really have specific insights to offer.
That's completely fine, but that's definitely a nice approach to think about, right? Amandeep, you should go ahead.
Yes, and I think Sushmita has also mentioned in the chat itself the issue that I was also circling around, which is, and I will just read it out right now. It is the perception of threat that matters from the receiver's end, and so the budget varies, right? That's the reason why you have such a big defense budget, and maybe just a tiny fraction of that, and that's the reason you spend around 1% of GDP or 1.2% of GDP. Maybe the actual number is less on health, right? And public expenditure on health, and on the other hand you have a sufficiently decent amount of spending on defense. So I think, and whose perception matters, right? And I think Amartya said, he quotes this brilliant argument in one of his books, It's an Uncertain Glory. So I was recently reading that, and he says, there was a power cut back in around during the 2000s. There was one significant power cut and electricity went out in a lot of places. And right, something similar also happened very recently, where the coal shortage was given so much hue and cry was raised that there might be an electricity shortage. What about the people who do not have electricity at all, who do not have an electricity bulb in their homes? Because there are homes like that. And sometime earlier, that problem was very, very acute. And right, so nobody was even looking at those people. So you have this almost funny situation where this maybe the 10% of the population is screaming about the power cut, while the other 90% is maybe thinking, okay, we do not have this problem because we have no electricity at all. And I think the similar problem, I think Mukundan raised that point as well about national security. So I think perceptions need to change from us as well, and how we could do that is maybe vote very wisely about what kind of government tries to prioritize this, or maybe if no government does this, maybe no representative does this, because that is what is happening right now. We need to look towards mass-based action and try to bring these social issues, which are very important issues, into the government side. Let's not vote for them. Let's vote for some people if that happens by a miracle, or if it does not happen, then I think mass-based action is the only way forward for that. Sorry, I went on a rant there. I'm sorry.
No, it's completely fine. And so I would just like to talk about this one last thing, and then we can end it. So does anybody have any opinion on like the interfaith like marriage, like if like what about like what are the opinions? Like I'm sure you people might have heard about the case Love Jihad. Have you people? Yeah. So then so how over here like the woman was forced to convert her religion to Muslim and everything. So how can the judiciary system help over here? Because it's still like against the fundamental rights. So does anybody have any opinion on this? Like basically what I'm asking
so basically, I think I read it last year that there was this case of yeah, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead, it's fine.
No, I was just adding to what you said about Love Jihad, right? So, when UP came out with its own law, right? And then Gujarat also passed its own amendment bill recently in April. To add on to that there's no need for that law, because there are laws that exist already. That could what do you say, that recourse for a woman, if she's being forced to convert to Islam. There's special marriages, marriage act, which where's there's section 25, I suppose. Then there is Indian Divorce Act, then there's section 415 or 417 in IPC, I suppose. So there are a ton, I would say, not a ton, I would say at least there's a recourse in the existing laws. So we don't have to have another another conversion, anti-conversion law, and then it becomes more cumbersome for the states, because then again different states will have different agendas. So
but
that's
again, like what
to add.
I feel, what according to me, what I feel is like, yeah, there are laws. Like it's not like there aren't even laws like on marital, I mean not on rape, sorry, but like how there have been even cases before also, like how in marital rape cases, like they have said that the woman's body should not be treated just as an object. But the laws, according to me, what I feel, are so loosely handled, and it's kind of biased, especially towards the woman. So though we have such laws, but women are still seen to be coerced. And even in this case, like though they had, I think they married under the Special Marriage Act, but she was still coerced to convert into another religion. So that is what, like, basically I just wanted to talk on. So does anybody else want to say something, or can we conclude it? Ishita, you want to say something?
Nothing very significant. I just wanted to say, like what you were saying, like efficacy of these laws is just so questionable. Like even now that there are laws that, I'm so sorry, my dog is making a noise. But I mean, there's even now that laws that protect women, women being raped. But I mean, still women do get raped at a very alarmingly large scale. And I mean, yeah, and I did not want to add anything significant.
You're muted, Sanchali.
Yeah. What I was, am I audible now? Yeah. So, Ryosha, do you want to say anything else?
I think these are all the points that we have.
Okay, so now, like, coming to the conclusion. So what I feel like India is genuinely like at a war with all the laws according to the girls and the women. And the women are basically traumatized because they have been facing so much oppression, like throughout their private life, their families, and like girls are being locked up as well in several states, like in the villages as well, if we see. And there's so much unbalanced sex ratio, like even when it comes to the wealthy families. And like it's killing the women slowly because they have been facing like so much violations against themselves. Like in general, there have been a lot of violence against the women like throughout the globe. But since we're talking about India and like how we're living in a patriarchal society, women have been facing they have been facing the discrimination against and have been suffering and are suffering this discrimination in silence, like keeping in view the pandemic situation as well. So self-sacrifice and self-denial are like their nobility and fortitude, and yet they have been subjected to all the equalities, indignities, and inequality and discrimination, as Justice K. Rama Swamy has said it. And I think we have covered up like on how like even the personal laws are given yet more importance than the fundamental laws. So I would just like to end the discussion here and thank you all for joining. And yeah.
Thank you everyone for a very interesting discussion today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.